Wow, if that first video wasn't the perfect cliffhanger, I don't know what is. Totally by accident. That was just the natural laws of me running out of time. I don't think it was any kind of divine miracle. I'll backtrack a little bit and basically set up the premise again. God is the great watchmaker. He designs a watch and then he builds it. He designs the gears. He puts it together. He twists the fob. The watch starts ticking. And then he sets the watch right there on the table and sits back and watches it. Now, the watch in this analogy is the universe. What they might say the world back then. Maybe they would use like a broader term for everything. But the point is this, that God designed the world, he fabricated it, and he also created the laws by which things will move in it, much in the way you are utilizing certain laws of physics and spring tension and other kinds of really fun ideas in order to make a watch work. So all of that is designed into the watch, and then he twists it, lets it go, and watches it do its thing. So this is a very different way of looking at how the world works, how people work, and it certainly does fly in the face of earlier notions we talked about, such as unconditional election, or as we sometimes call it, predestination, where no matter what you did, God already knew. If you're going to heaven, you're going to hell. Nothing you could do change your mind, would change God's mind. I mean, there's not a whole lot of motivation to be like even a slightly better person under that system. But under deism, yeah, this whole idea that being ethical and compassionate and reasonable um, are things that are good for you and good for your soul, and are things that God looks favorably upon. Comes up in comics every now and then. This is one of my favorite online comics. It's called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. It's super nerdy, but they have, comics about language, about science, robotics, chaos theory, religion, all kinds of different topics. It's really thoughtful. But here's like deism being put into play in a slightly humorous tone. So you have this guy praying at the top. And he says, "Dear God, I," and then you can tell this is God's voice. It's different color and it's purple too. Um, he says, "Look, dude, I just set the universe in motion. I don't do major changes." I don't know. That's the best God voice I have. If I get struck by lightning during this, you'll know what really happened. Then this whole deism idea will go out the window. Then who do I talk to? The only one who gets things done is evolution. So I should talk to her? Yeah, but she's a little different. So then he starts praying, "Dear evolution," and then she says, "Can't talk. Busy slowly turning a cow into a fish." That's it. Yeah. Slowly. Slowly. So evolution can easily be put into the deist framework, the deist way of looking at spirituality, God, and religion. Evolution is governed by a series of natural laws, which are fundamentally based on how organisms adapt and change to different stimuli. And through later generations, the ones that adapt the best are the ones that move on and tend to procreate better and multiply more. Now, this does get applied in social settings in the 19th and 20th century, what gets called social Darwinism, um, which is a completely different story. You'll see about it in 75B if you take it. Um, but yeah, it's really a crock. But I don't have time to talk about that right now. Oh, and that's the end of that for now. Let me go ahead and go back here. You don't want to see that. And we'll move on to the next one in a second. Moving right along, Benjamin Franklin gives us a nice introduction to early American thinking and philosophy through his ideas about deism and also about government. I hope you did like the short satirical piece, ways in which a large empire can be made smaller. I'm butchering the name. Uh, Very witty writer and had a lot of tools on his belt with regards to how to explain things. Uh, Different tones and different genres, even. As we get closer to the revolution, it's important for us to remind ourselves of what helped to lead up to that revolution. And to be very honest, John Locke's writings, which we talked about earlier, is certainly one of those things. The idea that, doing duty by God means being rational and compassionate and ethical is something that really flies in the face of genetic monarchies, right? That doesn't make you closer to God. Uh, the proponents of the Enlightenment would argue, and that deists would argue, your ethical behavior, your compassion, your commitment to reason, that's what makes you closer to God. Um, and other things too. We'll do a quick review here. Just wanted to give you a nice little snap of what the American colonies, or what will soon be the United States of America, looked like right about the time of the Revolution. This is a frontispiece of Philadelphia from the Delaware River. As you can see, it's bustling and scenic, a place of great activity, but also of great commerce. The colonies are getting richer and richer and resenting more the very one-sided governance coming from the imperial seat. Oh boy, again with who's moving my slides around? We have events that lead up to it. The Boston Massacre, where British troops fired upon colonial protesters, really helped turn public sentiment against British rule. Part of that dissent was expressed through the Boston Tea Party, and this anti-imperialist sentiment grows by leaps and bounds through the technology of the printing press, including political cartoons. And there's that picture of the printing press we saw before. And with that increase of printing press usage in the colonies, we get the dissemination of many different publications and magazines and newspapers that keep people informed and on their own terms. And ideas of an identity apart from the British are also expressed through uh, the printing the printing media that's coming out of the time, including this idea of a snake that is divided and must unite. Um, in general, reptiles tend to have great regenerative abilities. Lizards can lose and regrow their tails. This is probably stretching it a little bit much, but I think everybody got the drift. And all of this does lead to the founding fathers declaring independence from the British Empire. Here we see on the left is one of Thomas Jefferson's rough drafts for the Declaration of Independence. I know a lot of you are working on your rough drafts right now. Look how messy and sloppy this is. That's okay. Rough drafts should be messy and sloppy. If you try to make it perfect the first time around, you're going to go nuts before you even get past the first sentence or the first paragraph. Get the big ideas out, weld together. I'm switching metaphors here. Weld together the foundation and the framework of the car and drop in the engine before you start worrying about the paint job, the exact wording. And here's a demonstration of some kind. I forget what that was about. But that leads us to our next founding father, and I'm going to say founding father and founding mother. We have John Adams and Abigail Adams, whose letters are really, really important for people understanding not only the progress from the Continental Congress to the early United States of America, but also how this progress went forward and how it related to at least one family through their own familial discourse and communication back and forth through letters. Top, we've got John Adams, Harvard grad, was an attorney by profession, and opposed that Stamp Act. Remember, it was the Stamp Act that actually set off the Boston Massacre. People were mad because they said that every piece of paper that came from Britain and landed in the US, or the colonies rather, had to be taxed and have an official stamp or cannot be sold. Paper, paper. He also defended John Hancock and other revolutionaries in British court. And he was also the Massachusetts delegate to the First Continental Congress. Very important man. Also our second president. Now, Abigail Adams was his wife. Did not study formally in school. And let's remember that even among well-off families and wealthy families, this tended to be the norm. But she was naturally intelligent. She was very quick at learning things. And here's another really important point. She had a father who not only encouraged her studies, but worked with her in academic subjects, in her reading and her writing and her math and other subjects. Remember, we see that same kind of relationship. Father as, educational motivator and encourager. We saw that with Anne Bradstreet. These women were fortunate that they had such open-minded and forward-thinking homes and fathers. But to think that that's what it took in order to be educated, it's a bit of a mind blow. And even though she didn't have any formal education, she was super smart. She was really up on the events of the day, very invested in understanding the road to the American Revolution and what should happen after. So she did act as John's confidant. And this includes in, matters of politics when John Adams was working in the Continental Congress, and also personal advisor regarding, matters of how to deal with people. And she also was a sounding board for legal and political matters that John Adams was involved in. So, I mean, she's really, in some ways, his legal and political partner. Um, Unfortunately, at that time, she could never be acknowledged as such, but this is probably the best case scenario you could get back then. Very thoughtful, very well read. Interestingly, you will note that in the letters of John and Abigail Adams, they do not correct her spelling, so you will see some irregularities there. And that being said, the correlation between correct spelling and intelligence is a very tenuous one at best. So I suggest we don't get too hung up on that. And her correspondence with John is one of, the very young America's most celebrated, most widely read pieces of epistolary literature.